Windhager, Wood, inside 50. When you need Miller, what a mark!
G'day and welcome to the GameDay Squad Aussie Rules Fantasy Show. I'm Pitty, and joining me to cover everything Aussie Rules this season is Haz, and together we are the Fantasy Bros. We've partnered with GameDay Squad to bring you everything you need to know to succeed in this season's Aussie Rules competition. Haz, how are you, mate?
I'm good, Pitty. How are you? It's been a good week in fantasy sport. The day of recording, we've just wrapped up the Oz cricket season last night, and I think I've managed to nail myself a prize card, so I'm pretty stoked with that. And I've also had some pretty good pulls over on the Discord stage the other day, so I'm buzzing a little bit, and hopefully we can keep it rolling heading into the Aussie Rules season. But how are you, mate?
I'm good, thanks, mate. No prize card over here to talk about, and no diamonds hanging out of my pockets either. So just to everyone listening, Haz was talking to me before, and he would love to trade his diamond Nick Dacos and diamond Harry Sheasel, and he said he's happy to take not much for it. So hit him up, get in his DMs. He wants to get rid of them. Now, also, mate, I forgot to mention this last episode, but how good is that intro audio we have of Wang's 2-vote game at the end of last year?
I still can't believe he got 2 votes for that game. He was an absolute freak, and I think that audio sums up that game as well, the massive comeback that St Kilda had and the player that Wang is. And obviously we're going to be targeting him quite a bit this year because he is an absolute freak of nature. So it's great to lead into the episode with that because, man, I wish I could play half as good as he does. And just by the way, and everyone listening, I have had some offers for the Nick Dacos and Harry Sheasel, and they are not up for trade or sale. Are we happily keeping them for the next 10 years? So I know you're just jealous, mate, but that's okay.
I am jealous, and that's a very fair call, absolutely. Now, anyway, let's continue on with our team previews. So do you want to explain to our viewers, mate, what they can expect from us across this preview series?
Yeah, of course. So this show is the third installment of our pre-season team preview series, where over the coming weeks we'll preview all 18 AFL clubs by letting you know the ins and outs, any positional changes from last season, primetime fixtures, under 22 guns, and finally the must-have players to target this season. There's also an exciting pack opening competition where you, the viewers, as always, can win some pretty special prizes. Don't forget to like and subscribe across all our socials to keep up to date via @FantasyBros AU on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Apple Music, and Spotify.
Yeah, you scored. You can sign up using promo code FBAR26, all in capital letters there, to get 3 9-player common packs to get you started. Plus, you'll also get a stack of bronze cards to help get your free-to-play AFL starter squad up and running. Now, all right, Haz, let's jump straight into our third team preview for the season. In this episode today, we'll cover everything to do with the Geelong Cats, the Gold Coast Suns, and the GWS Giants. Do you want to just start us off by running through how the Cats went last season, what their primetime and Sunday fixtures look like for our new GDS special competitions, and, of course, what the player movement was like this off-season?
Yeah, of course, mate. So Geelong last season, they did finish second, obviously had that loss to the Brisbane Lions in the grand final. I think the juggernaut just keeps rolling on. They just find ways to continue to have success at that club. Chris Scott is an amazing coach. They have some amazing players. They've just got, like I said, they got that system down there that they just know what works. They know what's expected of each other. So they had the 17 wins last season and 6 losses. It's pretty crazy to me. I think if you look at their finals record, they've made the prelim final, I think 11 out of the last 13 years, which is crazy. And they feature an equal most 8 times in our primetime fixtures. So we probably should be looking to lock and load those players when we're looking at our primetime fixtures for that special comp. And then the Cats, as expected, only feature 2 times in the FantasyBros Sunday Showdown up until round 15. So we're probably looking to target them more for our standard competitions more than the Sunday Showdown. They don't really have many key under 22 eligible players that might be for focus for coaches. Jai Clark, Connor Sullivan, and George Stevens are a few there. Probably not notable scorers. They might have a spike this year potentially, but that's to be seen. Some key player movements. Mitch Duncan has retired, and Cam Guthrie has been delisted after a long run of injuries that have inhibited him across the last couple of seasons. And then the key ins, they've drafted Hunter Holmes, which is Max Holmes' brother. And James Walker's been traded across from Hawthorn to add to that on-ball brigade. And then obviously some notable position changes that are going to impact coaches for 2026. Bailey Smith, he has changed from a forward to a midfielder. Max Holmes has changed from a defender to a midfielder. Patrick Dangerfield has now forward status, so he might be a little sneaky pod there for certain matchups. And Mark Blitzarves has moved into the ruck. So that pretty much sums up the Geelong Cats 2025 season and off-season. That leads us nicely into our key talking points around the fantasy relevant players and positions based on last season's data. So once again, thanks to DFS Australia, we've gathered data on each team's market share of fantasy points, centre bounce attendances, otherwise known as our CBAs, and kick-in statistics with play-on percentages, of course. Pitty, what did this data look like for the Cats in 2025?
Yeah, we'll start off with that market share there again. That's a fantastic snapshot into their 2025 season, and for us in terms of our GDS coaching, the players that scored really well for our squads. So number one, no surprise, Bailey Smith, their star from last season. He was incredible. So he had 7.3% of their team's total scoring. Max Holmes as well, 6.5% there, coming at number 2, followed by Brian Myers, their small forward. And then Tom Atkins and Sean Manor rounding out the 4 and 5. And Jeremy Cameron also sneaks into 6 there as that key forward. He's just an absolute star, isn't he? Across to their centre bounces, we'll notice that Tom Atkins had equal most centre bounce attendances for the Cats with 71%. Reece Stanley is that also sharing that equal most centre bounce attendances, often playing in that ruck, followed by Bailey Smith and Max Holmes, the two we just spoke about there in the market share. You'll see someone there, like someone different we might not have expected, which was George Stevens with 44% CBAs. He sits there in 5th, so attending the 5th most CBAs. But the thing to keep in mind with George Stevens is, I think from memory, he only played 2 games. So again, that data doesn't encapsulate the total number of games they play, it just goes off their average. So again, he's not one we saw in there a lot, but when he did, he commanded 44% of CBAs. And then coming in at 6th there as well is the resident tagger at the Cats that we need to keep an eye on this year. Whenever you have a team coming up against the Cats, you just need to do a quick check in the team list and see if Oyshen is lining up in the midfield, because there's every chance he could be tagging the start midfielder. In the kick-ins, we saw Lawson Humphreys, the youngster for the Cats there. He came in at first. He took 72 kick-ins, which was the most for the Cats, followed by Tom Stewart close behind on 64. And then Zach Guthrie and Max Holmes at 4th. Mitch Duncan comes in at 5th, but obviously he has finished up and retired now. He's coaching over at West Coast. Just the thing there on the kick-ins, you'll notice Lawson Humphreys, he had the most kick-ins, but he only played on 68% of the time. So we want our players, if we're picking them, to be playing on as much as possible. If you look at Tom Stewart there, he took 64 kick-ins, but he played on 91% of the time. So every time they play on by leaving that square for our new coaches, you'll get that 4 points in game day squad. If they stay in the square and take their kick, it will not count. So we do want them playing on. So if Lawson Humphreys can maintain that, I'll call it the market share of their kick-ins, or the monopoly of the kick-ins, if he can keep that number but increase how many times he's actually playing on, we could potentially look at him in our squads, I reckon, because he's on the up, that youngster. Just looking at that, mate, do you have any key takeaways looking at the data?
Couple, obviously linking back to the last slide that we talked about, some of those key positional changes for this year. And obviously we see the 2 standouts from last year, the running brothers and Bailey Smith and Max Holmes. Now, obviously they both have midfield status and they're both still going to be very popularly played. But obviously, as we know, we've got a depth of midfielders to select from each week. Bailey Smith obviously was the highest averaging player last season, so he's probably going to be selected in that midfield regardless. But Max Holmes probably becomes a bit of an interesting one where you might only look to play based on matchup. But obviously we know he has a ceiling, but he also potentially does have a bit of a low floor. So it's going to be interesting to see how coaches pick Max Holmes this season. And then obviously I think there's a couple there. Tom Atkins, you're probably not looking to play him unless it's maybe on a primetime fixture. Obviously, he's got a good % of their market share there, but I think he's probably only looking to play him in those special competitions. And then just an interesting one that has just stood out to me straight away. What is Jeremy Cameron doing taking kick-ins? He's at the wrong end of the ground. He's taken 1 kick-in and he didn't even play on. What's he doing? He doesn't didn't want to add that fantasy stat there for that kick in, which is a bit of a shock. So I don't know what he's doing down that end of the ground, but don't expect many kick-ins from Jeremy Cameron this year because he'll be down the other end kicking goals, that's for sure.
Oh, could you imagine that? To be fair, Geelong actually had a number of players that took only one kick in, and that's why I put him in, because I thought it'd be quite funny to see Jeremy Cameron's there in the kick-ins, but he just finds a way to get points, doesn't he? He's so good. But it's, with those ins, like James Warple coming in as well from the Hawks, clearly they want to add to that midfield mix to strengthen that. We saw that Brisbane sort of overpowered them in the second half of the grand final, and it was because their midfield depth really dropped off. If you look at, we talk about the Lions, they have Neil, Dunkley, McCluggage, but then they go down to Will Ashcroft and Zach Bailey and, even Levi as a first year ran through there. When you look at the Cats, they had Maxi Holmes and Baz Lenka running through there as their two sort of big ones, Tom Atkins at 3. But then it drops off. You're going down to basically Patrick Dangerfield and Mark Blitzarves and Brian Myers. They really need that sort of extra midfielder. So, expect James Warple to sort of get bumped up that in terms of the CBAs, and I don't think he'll necessarily take away from too many others, but he will have to get some CBAs from somewhere, won't he?
Yeah, that's it. And obviously the Cats, they managed Patrick Dangerfield pretty well last year. And I think the plan was to pretty much play him as a permanent forward up until when the season got into the thick of things towards the end of start of finals, I should say. So they're probably going to look to do something similar where Dangerfield is probably more that powerful forward leading out of the goal square to back up Jeremy Cameron and Shannon Neal. So they're probably going to be looking for Warple to be that fourth midfielder until Dangerfield comes in and probably has those short bursts that we know that he can do and take the game away from the opposition. But other than that, if you look at Mullen, Nevitt, Blitzarves, Blitzarves was their ruck. Obviously, he's Mr. Versatile, so you don't really know what position he's going to play. But Mullen probably only looking in the midfield if they want to tag someone like they did against Brisbane with McCluggage. I think Warple will probably slide straight into that midfield mix.
Yeah, he should add some good experience, and he has a lot of grunt work as well at the stoppage. So I think he'll be quite good for them. I just think would have been nice if they could have picked up a Rowan Marshall in that trade period as well to improve their ruck stocks, because they're pretty much rolling out with Reece Stanley again. Blitzarves will help out. I know they've got Toby Conway, is it? I think is it Toby Conway? Yeah. So got Conway running around there that they might get some games into, but Geelong haven't really been known to do that in the past. So Marshall would have really helped out. But anyway, they're not rolling with that. So we might continue moving on, mate, and have a look at one of the players from the Cats that we've each picked that we're keen on or interested in for this upcoming season.
Yep.
So my player, I'll start us off, if you don't mind, is Brian Myers again. This might be a bit of a safe pick potentially, but I just love watching Brian Myers play, except when he comes up against Brisbane and kicks stupid goals from the boundary that just defy all laws of physics. And, I mean, typically, us fantasy coaches, we've never really liked the small forwards because their scoring can be quite volatile at times, and generally that's still true. However, Brian Myers, the role he plays for Geelong is just flipping this script on its head. He's currently the second best forward you can be selecting from this season, only behind Harry Sheezel, and he boasts a healthy 2025 average of 110.6 GDS points. Now, Myers, he's not your typical small forward. He often starts on the forward flank. He'll roll up to the stoppages. He works really high up the ground, but then he comes back the other way, and he uses his elite foot skills when going inside 50. As he works up the ground, he'll often get involved in that transition play by taking marks and moving on the ball, again by foot. And he continues to then work forward, setting up his teammates for a scoring opportunity, or he'll kick some snags himself because he's just got such a high kicking efficiency. And because of this ability to play higher up the ground and the fact that Chris Scott and his teammates look to use him frequently in general play, it just means that he's got an elevated floor in a line where sometimes we just need that good score. But this is the part that I find super interesting about Brian Myers. When we did our deep dive, it was Brian Myers that rounded out the top 10 centre bounce attendances with 13% across the home and away season. And we kind of glossed over it, which I'm really happy we did because, funnily enough, this only started to happen in the back part of last year. Myers actually attended 34% of his team's CBAs after the mid-season bye, and in his last 5 games, he had 46% CBAs. There was a clear shift in that midfield mix, and Scotty's intentions of using the small forward is something that I'm hoping that we see continue again in 2026. I know Warp comes in, but I just wonder if this is something they want to continue with. If he's going to be a forward that we can pick in game day squad, who has shown really consistent scoring over the years, and now he's getting a go in the midfield at times, I think it only bumps up his stocks. So I was pumped to have packed his diamond late last year, and I'll definitely be rolling that out somewhere, potentially in the primetime competition, if they feature equal most 8 times. And he's someone I'm super excited about for this 2026 season.
Yeah, love the shout, mate. Obviously, like you said, he was the the highest averaging forward from last season, or behind Basilenko. So yeah, I love the pick. He can't go wrong. Like you said, he's got a great kicking efficiency, utilizes every disposal. He's got that weird kicking action, but geez, he puts it to good use. I think he was the leading goal assist player in the comp 2 years in a row. So he just finds ways to get teammates the ball. And most of the time he is, looking for his key forwards and trying to hit up Jeremy Cameron or Shannon Neal. But I think you're right. I think it even if he doesn't get this midfield time that the data tells us he did get at the back end of last season, obviously we know he still rolls up to that stoppage as a high half forward and plays that extra +1 and around the ball. It's not like he gets caught deep in the forward 50. So even if that role doesn't eventuate this season, I am still keen on Myers just for that ability to get around the ground and impact the stoppages regardless if he has the CBAs. But yeah, I'm with you. I hope to see that continue. And mate, I know you packed his diamond, but I've packed his all-star. So I think I'm with you. I'll be probably looking to play that probably in a primetime comp or even maybe in just our normal competitions.
Mate, what cards don't you have?
We won't go there right now. I've had some luck recently, and it's about time because you're normally the one that gets all the luck.
Now, before you start talking about Tommy Stewart, I need to take a really, really deep breath, because if you are a fantasy coach, if you picked him in your game day squads last year, there's every chance you've copped an injury. So go on, talk to us about Tom Stewart.
Yeah, so Tom Stewart, he is a bit of an injury-prone player, but he averaged the 97.39 points last season from his 20 games, but it was his lowest fantasy return for the last 4 seasons, which was down from his 104.68 points in 2024. And that's probably, like you said, it mentioned probably some due to some injury-interrupted matches where he was subbed out early. I know he was impacted probably, I think it was round 3, where he went off with next to no points and probably really hurt his average for the season. He's probably the best medium-sized intercept defender in the game at the moment. The Cats love being able to free him up to allow him to drift across the contest as that +1 and take those intercept marks. He's a 5-time All-Australian and a 2-time Best and Fairest winner for the Cats, which just shows how much he is rated within the competition. And at Geelong, obviously, winning a Best and Fairest as a halfback flanker or an intercept defender is a pretty good achievement there. To do it twice is really good. So he was truly missed on grand final day as the Cats really struggled to intercept and rebound off that halfback line. And that was basically just purely on his absence. As we saw with the kick-in monopoly earlier, Stewart is one of the 3 regulars who will share the kick-in duties, which gives him easy access to the +4s. And as you mentioned, Pitty, he plays on nearly every time at 91%. So he's guaranteed those. He does have a top 6 potential after his 2023 season, saw him finish with an average of 116.94, which was enough for him to finish as the 6th best defender for that season. And he regularly ranks elite for marks and kicks, meaning he doesn't need high disposal games in order to score well. Last season, he averaged 13.6 kicks and 7 marks per game. So obviously, as we know, they translate to better GDS points for coaches instead of just racking up handballs. So we want him kicking the ball, and that's what he does. We've seen the Cats experiment with Tom Stewart through the midfield, but I probably won't be banking on that becoming a consistent move again this season. Last season, Stewart only had the 3 games where he had the CBA action. In round 1 last season, he actually had 50% CBAs, which followed on from the back half of the 2024 season, where he had 10 games with CBAs in a row and 3 games over 80% CBAs, and that's at the back end of 2024. However, after that round 1 game where he had the 50%, CBAs. That role clearly didn't stay, as the next two times in round 4 and 19, he only had 5 and 3% CBAs respectively. So probably suggests that the experiment may be over, and he's probably too valuable at the defensive end of the ground for the Cats. I probably won't be looking to lock in Tom Stewart for our standard competitions, but with the introduction of these special competitions with our primetime fixtures and our Sunday showdowns, he becomes a great pick for those fixtures just due to his consistency and his scoring pedigree.
Yeah, again, you've raised some good points there, mate. I think I'll just pass. That's all. I will say though, the addition of some new rules in Game Day squad this year could sort of make that a bit easier to swallow. We have we're going to have a player dropping off essentially. So if he does have a game where it is injury affected, barring nothing else happens to the rest of your squad, like it could drop off. So he's maybe not a bad little pod play as is, with that additional rule that we can toy around with in Game Day squad this year. And as you said, with the number of primetime fixtures the Cats have, I think he's someone we definitely need to be looking at if he's taking a good chunk of those kick-ins and is as good as he has been those past few years. So I like that pick, mate.
Yeah, I'm expecting a bit of a bounce back year for him this year. I think he'll probably look to increase his average by 10 points up and around that 105 to 110 range. So yeah, I'll be looking at him potentially for some key matchups or good matchups. But yeah, more for those new special competitions.
Yeah.
That brings us to the end of our Geelong Cats preview. We will now preview the Gold Coast Suns. Pitty, do you want to run through how they went last season, their special comp summary, and the key player movement and their positional changes for 2026?
Yeah, absolutely. The Suns, they had a huge 2025 under Damien Hardwick, qualifying for their first ever final series, which gets a big monkey off the back, doesn't it? They finished the season with 15 wins and 8 losses, marking the club's most successful home and away campaign to date. And importantly, they played 2 games in their first final series, which will no doubt be an invaluable experience for the young squad. Matty Rowell, don't forget, he also won the Brownlow medal, becoming the second Suns player to claim the highest individual honour, and highlighting just how good he's been amid that team's rise in 2025. Now, in their elimination final against Freo, they had one of the most exciting games of football I've ever seen. They secured a 1-point win, and of course, it was their champion, David Swallow, who was retiring last season, who had that fairy tale moment right at the end. I think, again, it was one of the most incredible games of footy, and I don't think I slept after that for a few hours. I was that pumped up for them. But unfortunately, they were just beaten comfortably by the eventual premiers in that semi-final, where Rowell, he still had a game, mind you, if you look at the stats, but he was still shut down in terms of impact by Dunkley, and no one could really get up and about for them. It was a disappointing end, but there was, the whole year just represented genuine progress, optimism around the emerging list, and a new benchmark for the club moving forward. If you look at their special comp summary, they feature 4 times in our primetime fixtures through to round 15. So that has them basically right in the middle of the pack in terms of those allocations. And then similarly, they feature 3 times in the FantasyBros Sunday Showdown competition. So I think this is one of those teams in that middle of the pack where you want to have a few of their cards because you might want to play them in your standard competitions, but also in those special competitions across both the primetime and the Sunday. And our under 22 eligible players, they have a stack. I've only sort of put the key ones on the screen there for you, and we're going to have all of them listed in our textbook as well. But Will Graham is one that I find really interesting. Bailey Humphrey, Leo Lombard, Ethan Reid, Jake Rogers, and Jed Walter. They all are eligible for our under 22 competition. And I just realised I didn't put those positions on the screen too. Sorry. They're mainly sort of forwards: Walter, Rogers, Reid, Lombard. Actually, they're all forwards. There you go. Will Graham, I think, was listed as a midfielder last year, potentially. I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but as a forward, I probably don't mind that pick in our under 22s competition. Probably nowhere else though, and he's got to get a game first, to be honest, because they've got such a good list now at the Suns. Speaking of their key outs, they had Ben Ainsworth off to Carlton, Braden Fiorini's off to Essendon, and Sam Flanders off to St Kilda, chasing more midfield time. And David Swallow, obviously, he retired there after a massive career at the Suns, starting out when they started as well. Their key ins, they picked up Christian Petrarca from the Demons, which is probably the biggest signing or one of over the trade period. Jamari Ugle-Hagan also came up from the Western Bulldogs seeking a fresh start, and he looks like he's been training the house down in the preseason. Just mind you, looks super fit, super aggressive in all the drills they've been doing. Let's hope that can translate and he gets some games at that senior level. And I haven't normally been putting draft picks on the screen there, but Zeke Hewland as well was probably one of the most talked about draft picks of this crop, and he was their academy pick, of course. And really the main notable position change is Christian Petrarca has now gone from a midfielder to a forward, and probably one of the most relevant forwards we have in GameDay squad in 2026.
Yeah, the Suns were the surprise packet of last season. Obviously, like you said, they qualified for their first final series, getting the monkey off the back. And, geez, they didn't just make up the numbers. They really put a good foot forward and were really competitive in that final series. So I'm expecting them to have another good year like this year and bounce back once again and potentially even aim for a top 4 finish. But it's interesting you say that Matt Rowell was shut down by Dunkley in that semi-final. And, geez, Josh Dunkley made it a mission to shut him down after their Q Clash loss to the Suns, where the Suns pumped the Lions by, I think it was like nearly 100 points. So the Lions wanted to get revenge for that, and Dunkley took it personal and really wanted to have a good game and shut Matt Rowell down. And obviously we know how good a season he had. Like you mentioned, he was the Brownlow medal winner, pretty much coming from nowhere. No one really expected that, but it just shows how consistent he was last season and how impactful he is at the source, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little bit with our data deep dive.
Absolutely. And speaking of, mate, let's have a look at that now. So we'll jump into our key data for the Suns in 2025. Do you want to start talking us through?
Yeah, of course. So as I mentioned, obviously Matt Rowell, the Brownlow medalist there, was the top of the fantasy market share at 6.9% of the Suns' fantasy points, followed by his skipper, Noah Anderson, big ruckman, Witsy, finished at third, Took Miller, and then John Noble, the recruit from last season, who was probably one that I think overachieved out of the two trade targets or trade recruits from last season. Everyone thought that Dan Rioli might be the one that would have the biggest impact. I think Noble came out and surprised quite a few coaches with how consistent and that ceiling that he does have. Obviously, Braden Fiorini has been traded there. He leaves a vacant spot on the wing. And obviously Sam Flanders as well has been traded after an injury-interrupted season last year. The CBAs, they do have a pretty clear top three, and that is Witsy, Anderson, and Rowell. Alex Davies ran through the middle quite a bit last season when he didn't play all the games. It was just basically because that is the only position that he could really play when he did get a game. Took Miller, rolled through the half-forward flank and also through the midfield as well, as probably their third banana last year. And then obviously they really like the look of Bailey Humphrey and the impact that he provides the club, and the way he's projecting and trending is really exciting for that club, because we could see last season that he does have the ability to just be an absolute X factor that takes the game away from opposition. Then our kick-in monopoly, it's mainly John Noble there that takes the majority of those kick-ins, and he plays on 100% of the time. 100% of the time you are getting +4 kicks from John Noble every time there is a behind kicked. And if he isn't there to take it, he must be on the bench for those periods. But Will Powell or Joel Jeffrey both have 42 kick-ins last season, playing on 86 and 95% of the time. So Johnny Noble looks like a really good pick once again this year. They love the ball in his hands, and I'm sure we'll probably talk about him in a little bit of time. Is there anything that really stands out to you, mate, when looking at those?
Oh, just that John Noble's giving himself 452 more points, across the season just by playing on every time. So, yeah, I like that. That stands out to me. But no, in all seriousness, like that market share, we have Braden Fiorini, who was 6th in their market share, and Sam Flanders at 9th as well, after a bit of a drop-off from what he has done in the past. I think there's points up for grabs this year, but, Christian Petrarca, he's going to slot in there. He's going to command a fair bit of that market share, as well as the CBAs too. Like if we sort of look at that, again, Alex Davies sitting in that CBAs at 4th. He wasn't playing every single game. He only played a handful. So really, as you said, we're looking at Anderson, Rowell, Miller. Do you see Christian Petrarca bumping Took Miller out? Like, will Took Miller go? Will he drop his CBAs from 54%? Would it be fair to say Petrarca might take a chunk of that? Miller will then be sort of dropped down a fair bit and maybe play a bit more forward, still going through the middle at times. And then Bailey Humphrey might still hover around that 38%.
Yeah, I think you pretty much nailed it on the head. I think that's exactly what will happen. I think Christian Petrarca obviously is the big fish that they went out to try and get, and they got it. It's probably the first big fish they've got since Gary Ablett in their first season. So I don't think they've recruited him to play forward. They've recruited him to play in the midfield. And I think Touk Miller is the one that it would still be in there. It would be a role player, play a high half forward and roll up to the stoppage and get a fair share of his CBAs when, one of the boys need to have a rest off the ground. But yeah, Petrarca will be straight into that midfield mix. It'll be Anderson, Rowell and Petrarca starting in there. And I think, like you said, Bailey Humphrey probably hovers around that 38% again once this season, because they just like the impact that he provides around the ball. And like I said, that X factor that he provides. So yeah, I think you pretty much nailed it on the head, mate.
Yeah, well, let's continue moving on then. We've just covered a number of players there from the Suns. Who have you picked out that you're keen on or interested in this season?
Well, it is that guy, Christian Petrarca. And like we mentioned earlier, the Suns do have a very exciting list for 2026. And I expect them to be a very relevant team for coaches this season. Petrarca averaged a reasonable 103.9 points last season, which saw him finish as the highest scoring midfielder at the Melbourne Demons. Interestingly, that places him as the fourth best midfielder from a scoring perspective at the Suns, behind Rowell, Anderson and Miller from last season. But I think the thing that all coaches love for Petrarca this season, as we've already mentioned, is that positional change. Moving from a midfielder where he finished the season ranked as the 31st highest averaging midfielder to now having forward status, where his 103 points from last season would have seen him finish as the sixth highest averaging forward, which just highlights that how important that positional change is for Petrarca's relevancy in 2026. He hasn't quite been the dominant and powerful midfielder we all knew and loved before that horrific injury on Queen's birthday in 2024. But pre-injury, Petrarca had season averages of 117.08 in 2022 and 121.44 in 2023, highlighting how elite he can be when fit and firing. But the question probably still remains, can we see him return to those scoring heights with that fresh start he was desperately craving at the Gold Coast Suns? I expect him to be that third midfielder, as I mentioned. Last season at the Demons, Petrarca averaged 73% CBAs before their bye and 57% CBAs post-bye, for an average of 66% CBAs for the season. And I think he will remain around the same percentage. And it wouldn't surprise me to see his CBAs potentially decrease slightly from the Demons. Obviously, we talked about it just before. He'll slot in there and be that third banana. But I do expect him to spend a little bit of time forward as well, just knowing how damaging he can be inside 50 with that big frame that he has and that goal craft as well. I think he's a near must play each week in our forward lines across all competitions, whether that's our standard competitions or our special competitions. And especially for the Suns' first three games against West Coast, Richmond, and then his revenge game against the Demons. So I think everyone needs to check their Petrarca stocks and hit the transfer market if you find yourself a couple of cards short, because we're going to be looking to play him pretty much nearly every week.
Yeah, I love everything you've said there. And you know what? I hate saying lock, like they're a lock every single week, but just because in Game Day squad, you've almost really got to look at every single week as a new week. And part of me believes that there is no true lock every single week, but I think Christian Petrarca probably is that this year in that forward line. I just love what he can bring there. Exactly what you've said, and particularly that first matchup, West Coast playing at home. I think that's going to be a huge game for him, which no doubt he'll love playing with that really highly talented midfield as well. So, but the player I'll talk about is the one that you said before you thought probably over-delivered in 2025. And again, I've probably got a slightly different viewpoint, so probably sharing each of our viewpoints will be really good for our listeners. But I just think that, the Suns have such an exciting list with some genuine star power. We could sit here and talk about Noah Rowell, our 2025 Brownlow medalist and resident grass enthusiast, or I could talk about what a jet Noah Anderson is. But I just think that a big reason they improved in 2025 was off the back of John Noble. It was the ex-Magpie that took that number one distributor role of halfback last year, not Dan Rioli, which was interesting. And I tell you what, didn't he look good doing it? Noble brings some serious run and dash off that halfback line, which the Suns have desperately needed. And he just has so much confidence with ball in hand. He's got absolutely no fear of getting that ball, in whatever moment and trusting himself to use it. He's just got an ability to rack up possessions quickly, and this shows in his GDS scoring throughout 2025. He was able to average 110.5 GDS points for the season, and that was up from his 87.3 in his final year at Collingwood. I think there were a few factors around that average being probably slightly down, but he also showed a nice ceiling. So this was, which we love from a disposal happy defender. So he had 143 GDS points in round 3 against the Demons, 145 against the Hawks in round 10, and 138 against his old team in round 18. Now, granted, I think he probably delivered, not over-delivered, but I probably don't project anything more from him this year. I think he'll probably be the exact same as what he was this year. I don't see any more upside because there's absolutely no reason for him to improve other than saying, I just think he'll improve. So I've got nothing to base it on. I think that there's no more upside, but he's just such a quality defender. He's very consistent. He has a ceiling. He's got the role at the Suns. And I just really like that pick in our back lines for 2026.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. When I said he overachieved, I meant overachieved coming across from the Pies. Obviously, from that average there you saw from 2024, he averaged 87.3. So he did have a significant jump in points. 23 points for a season average is a big jump. Obviously, he wasn't the Magpies' main distributor, and he came across as a bit of an unknown player in that role. So that's kind of when I overachieved. He was great. He was absolutely outstanding, and I completely agree with absolutely everything you said. I think he just overachieved on expectations coming across because all the talk was around Dan Rioli being that halfback that they desperately crave. But you were right. It was John Noble that drove everything for them. And I'm just having a quick look at his statistics from last season. So he averaged 17.8 kicks per game and 7.5 handballs. So he's having 24 or 25 touches a game. He's averaging nearly 5 marks, 2 tackles. Obviously, we spoke about he's getting 452 extra points from playing on from all those kick-ins that he's getting. So, yeah, you're right. I think he's probably not going to improve a whole lot. If he does, you're probably looking at, just a couple points. But he's going to be in and around that 105 to 115 average this season, and he's going to be a great pick.
Yeah, particularly in those matchups where it's really favourable to our ball distributors as well. I think he's one that you would definitely target in those matchups with in terms of your salary. But again, probably just a consistent pick each week. Now, mate, that brings us to the end of our Gold Coast Suns preview. We'll now have a look at the GWS Giants. So do you want to talk us through how they went last season, what their special comp summary looks like, and, of course, the key player movement from the off-season?
Yeah, not a problem at all. So GWS, they did sneak into finals last year. They finished 7th. They mounted a comeback after being 7 goals down in that semi-final against the Hawks, but unfortunately just wasn't enough. They did have the 16 wins and 7 losses. They did have a bit of injuries last season. They do only have the 2 primetime fixtures this season heading into round 15, so they're not going to be too relevant for us as GDS coaches in that primetime competition. But they will probably be more relevant in our FantasyBros Sunday Showdown, but they have the 7 games through to round 15. So they're probably up there with the most, I think, behind West Coast, so probably the second most Sunday Showdown fixtures. So that's probably where I think a lot of coaches will be looking to play if you are prioritizing that competition, where we're looking to play those GWS players, because they do have some very fantasy relevant players once again this season. Their key under 22 eligible players, we've got Aaron Cadman, the young forward, Darcy Jones, who obviously has that asterisk there. Unfortunately, he will miss, I think, the whole season with an ACL injury, unfortunately. Nick Madden, Harry Rowston, and Harvey Thomas, and then some key outs. So obviously their veteran Callum Ward has pulled the pin and retired after he injured his knee last season. Just quickly on that, how emotional was that in that game where we saw Lockie Whitfield go over to him on the bench, just knowing that, his career was probably done and they played majority of their time together, and obviously how emotional Ward was. And then he came out and spoke to the team in that game at 3/4 time, and they overturned that deficit. I can't remember who they were playing. I think it was the Bulldogs, it might have been. And just out of nowhere, they snuck that victory. It was very, very touching that there for Callum Ward. Jacob Ware's moved over to Port Adelaide, and then obviously their big probably key in this season is Clayton Oliver, who's come across from the Melbourne Demons. They don't really have any notable fantasy positional changes for 2026.
Yeah, and so in terms of those under 22 eligible players with Darcy Jones missing, well, we assume it's the entirety of this season, and if it's not, it's the best part of it with that ACL. He would have been a really good pick in our forward lines there in that competition too. He had an average of 71.6 GDS points, and more importantly, he just looks so good when he plays. He's able to find the ball a lot, and he's a very hard matchup just with his speed and how electric he is. So it's a shame we're not going to be able to have him this year with the inaugural competitions that we can play them in. And Aaron Cadman looks like a gun as well, particularly for that competition too. He has an average of 71.4 GDS points, and he looks like a really exciting prospect that I could see having a big breakout this year and being someone we potentially look at as a pod in our standard competitions. The other one I'll quickly mention there as well, we talked about an injury there, or a couple actually, with Callum Ward retiring, as you said, and absolutely that was emotional. Unfortunately, that's the human side of sport. But we've also got Josh Kelly, who's going to miss most of 2026 with major hip surgery. So if you've got any Josh Kelly cards, just make sure you don't go and play them, because he will not be playing, unfortunately, for a while. And again, we're going to have a look at that shortly in terms of that key data.
Yeah, love that, mate. So that leads us into our key talking points around the fantasy relevant players and positions based on last season's data. Pitty, do you want to start by talking through the key fantasy data for the Giants in 2025?
Absolutely. So in terms of our market share, the top player for the GWS Giants is Lee Whitfield. Surprise, surprise. He had 6.9% of his team's fantasy points, just accumulating ball off the halfback. And as I said, it's probably no surprise to us GDS coaches that were playing last year. If you are new to GameDay squad, make sure you have a Lockie Whitfield somewhere in your collection. Finn Callahan comes in at second, actually, with 6.6%. Followed by Lockie Ash, so the partner in crime of Lockie Whitfield off that half-back line. And it would be interesting to see if you could look at their data, right? The 6.9% from Whitfield and the 6.5% from Lockie Ash. I wonder how much of that was them just kicking back and forth between each other or giving each other the handball receive. I reckon that would be most of it, to be fair. And then Tom Green and Toby Green, double greens, rounding out fourth and fifth in terms of that market share. The centre-bounce attendances, we have Green and Callahan. They're two big midfielders at 1 and 2. They attend most of the team's CBAs, followed by Briggsy, their ruckman. Nick Madden comes in at fourth. So if anyone's not too familiar with that name, he is the young ruckman at the Greater Western Sydney Giants as well. So he'll often fill in when Briggsy's injured or at times throughout the season. So he's that backup ruck. He's actually eligible for our under-22s competition. But I think around that ruck position, like, we don't actually have to play a ruck as such. It's more of a utility position. So you can sort of play a forward there. You can play a midfielder. You can play a defender. So you don't have to be playing Nick Madden. Just keep that in mind. Even though if you actually have a look at his average, he averages quite nicely in terms of that 70 GDS points, which is not bad if we're looking at under 22s competition. But again, we don't have to play a ruck. He just commands a fair bit of those CBAs. Lockie Keefe as well in there. So really, after Green and Callahan, it does really drop off a bit. And they've got a number of players that roll through the midfield. You've got Xavier O'Halloran would have a fair bit. Cogs, Josh Kelly's outside the top 10, but he would go through at times. We saw that in the final where he impacted late. Toby Bedford rolls through with some tagging jobs sometimes. So there's just a number of players outside of Green, Callahan and Briggs that go through. And in terms of the kick-ins, I've mentioned it already. Whitfield, Ash, they have the most, 128 to Whitfield, 116 for Ash. And they play on most of the time as well, which is really, really nice. And then that leaves Peanuts for the rest of them. I've mentioned a couple of things in there, Haz. Does anything stand out?
I love what you said about Whitfield and Ash there. I think you're right. Whoever does take the kick in, it used to be a scissors, paper, rock once they got to the goal square, because they used to seem to get there at the same time. And then they go, okay, you take it, you kick it to me, and I'll give it back to you. So I love to see that again this season from them, because they definitely do look for each other in that defensive 50 when trying to rebound the ball into the midfield.
And on that too, sorry, I'll jump in there. Do you think the Giants have to look at that going into 2026? I said this to you last year when the Giants were playing, and I think the message was more around, surely the Giants cannot continue the way they are, moving that ball out of that back line. Because if you ever watch it, sometimes they've got that footage behind the goals where you see them kicking out and they all literally look for each other. And then Ash will run past and he won't get the handball. And then he'll just cut this really weird run around the man on the mark to this spot where he'll get a really quick kick. He'll take that mark. And they just do that back and forth. And I just wonder, is that something they look at, or do you reckon they'll still be quite prominent in how they move that footy
I find
out?
it interesting because obviously you talk about this orange tsunami that they have, and when they transition to footy and they run in waves, and it's interesting that when it's from a stagnant play from a point or an intercept mark, it doesn't seem to be that quick, fast, counteracting transition footy. It's more, like you said, if it doesn't happen for Whitfield the first time, you'll look for a cheap 45 kick and go a bit slower. But I wouldn't surprise me to see a bit of a change in game plan from them this year. Obviously, they always seem to have success and they always seem to win enough games to play finals, but they haven't. The best they've made is a grand final in 2019 against Richmond, but they haven't made it back there since, and they've really kind of struggled to win those big games in those finals. And maybe the ball movement is probably one of those key factors, because it's a bit stagnant at times, and mainly because they just look for those two to drive that ball movement. So it's probably quite easy to shut down from an opposition perspective as well. And I think Lockie Ash was probably getting a bit more attention last year than Whitfield, and probably got tagged out of a couple of games by some relatively nobodies from a fantasy perspective. So maybe something they do look to this year, and maybe they, young drafting might come through and help change the way they play, or I don't know, maybe they might be more midfield oriented with Clayton Oliver's arrival. But it will be interesting to see. I think they'll still be prominent in the fantasy scoring for the Giants this year, and probably see them as probably one of the top two defenders in the competition. But it'd be interesting to see how that game plan potentially changes. Do you agree with that, or do you have a different viewpoint?
No, I agree with that. I think even if they did change their game plan slightly and they say, all right, we actually want to move this ball a bit quicker, we want to be a bit more aggressive and go through the corridor, who are they going to look to do that? It's still going to be Whitfield or Ash driving that. Maybe it does clip their ceiling a little bit, but I still think they're going to be heavily involved, and they've got such talent that I think, we should be really looking to play them. I think we don't overthink it. It was just an interesting point I thought I would raise just from having watched a fair few of their games last year. I don't mind what you said as well around that midfield mix and probably focusing there as their next lift in 2026, because as we just noted before, their CBA is the talent really drops off after Green and Callaghan. And again, Callaghan has probably really come on in that last 12 months, but they needed that extra body going in there that they could rely on Elio and Josh Kelly. So I really like the addition of Clayton Oliver. Hopefully he can get back to his best footy though. The only thing that sort of scares me a little bit is the fact he's sustained a bit of an injury this preseason that set him back a little bit. Probably nothing to be too worried about just yet. You'd imagine he still plays his preseason games and it's only a minor thing. But I think he'll be a great addition to that midfield mix.
Yeah, just coming back quickly to Lockie Whitfield and Lockie Ash discussion, I just remembered that halfway through last season, we did see Lockie Whitfield move to the forward line and start to play a bit of half-forward flank and push up to the wing. So that was them probably looking to experiment some different avenues with their ball movement, but obviously eventually they reverted back to the same old ways and put Whitfield back behind the ball to pair with Lockie Ash. And that was maybe because Lockie Ash started to get tagged in those games, and it was probably once they knew they could shut down Ash, they knew that they didn't have, oppositions knew they didn't have a second ball user that they could use. So it'd be interesting to see what happens again this season. But I think you're right, and I'm going to talk about Clayton Oliver in a minute as my player to target this season. But I think you pretty much nailed it on the head about that midfield mix.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I might start us off then, mate, if we're going to look at our players, and I'll talk about my player, which will then give you a bit of time to talk about Clayton Oliver. So my pick for 2026 from the Giants is Finn Callaghan. And Finn Callaghan, in my opinion, is one of the most exciting fantasy prospects we have coming into this season. In previous years, when we think of that GWS midfield, it's typically been the likes of Kelly Coniglio and in more recent times, Tom Green, which we sort of discussed before. But there was a changing of the guard last year, and that saw Finn Callaghan take the mantle as the number one fantasy midfielder at the Giants. He topped the GDS Stat Centre for our Giant midfielders with a season average of 115.5. And this was on CBAs after that mid-season bye. So this increased from 71% to 82% for Callaghan in that back half of the year. And then it continued, this trend in finals, where he was at the coalface for 91% of his team's CBAs. And I expect his involvement within that CBA rotation to continue in 2026, even with the addition of that man you're about to speak about in a moment. I think they see Callaghan as their number one midfielder, not Tom Green. And it's not just in the future, but I think it's now. I think they really want him to step up and be that midfielder that dominates the competition. And it's off the back of his power running through the middle of the ground. It is seriously a sight to behold. When he takes off in that midfield, he tucks the ball under his arm. He's got those big, broad shoulders, and he's just gone through the middle of the ground. But it's his fantasy scoring that's just as good, and that's highlighted by his finals performance, where he scored 156 GDS points in his side's elimination final loss, which was off the back of 19 kicks, 15 handballs, 4 marks, 8 tackles, and a goal. Mate, consider those stat lines stuffed. My only concern, though, is that teams are catching on to Callaghan and just how good he is. It's not just us GDS coaches that are catching on. And I don't think Tom Green cops any attention at all from opposition, and nor will Clary. So I think it's Callaghan who is by far their most damaging mid. And I'm just going to be keeping in mind when I go to roll out Callaghan, is the opposition maybe looking to tag? Do they have someone in their midfield that can shut him down? Because I can sort of foresee this year, if I look into the crystal ball, I can see a few floor scores, unfortunately. But other than that, I reckon he's going to be one of the best prospects we have this year. He has a serious ceiling, and he's only getting better.
Yeah, just having a quick look at Finn Callaghan. So he had a massive jump on his average from 2024. So gone from 87.7 points in 2024 to that 115.5, as you mentioned. And like you said, he's going... and teams are starting to catch on to the fact that he is their best midfielder, and it's taken him a little while to get going. Obviously, he got taken as a high draft pick in his draft class as a midfielder, and it's just taken him that little bit of while. He had to bide his time on the wing for a little bit, but now that he's in there, and he is the number one midfielder that teams are going to look to, how can they quell his influence, because he's going to go a long way in helping their team defeat the Giants this season. He averaged 27 touches last year, which just shows that he finds ways to touch the ball. Average 14 kicks and 13 handballs, 4 marks, 4 tackles. So you're right, he does like to stuff those stats sheets as well. So I love the pick. He's a great player. He's got a great ceiling. He's going to be a great player for years to come. So yeah, probably looking to target him in those matchups where we know there's probably no tag, and then those Sunday fixtures as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, talk to me about Clayton Oliver.
Yeah, so Claz, he's probably the most talked about player over the last 3 trade periods, and he's after a season where he was extremely unhappy, he's finally got that desired trade to the Giants, and he's now living outside the Melbourne bubble. And I think that will do him wonders this season. At his peak, as we know, Oliver was a fantasy peak who just loved to score big each game. In 2022, he finished with the 3rd highest average in the competition, with that average of 130.52 points per game. He backed it up in 2023, where he finished as the 5th highest average in the competition at an average of 133.4, which just highlights how well and how consistently he can score across a season. And doing it back-to-back seasons as well is very impressive. He had a significant drop in 2024 due to that injury-interrupted preseason to average only 91.6 points per game. And last season, he was able to improve on that average, but he was still nowhere near that peak. He averaged 103.41, which saw him rank as the 32nd best midfielder last season, behind his old teammate in Christian Petrarca. And I think he'll definitely be hoping that a fresh start will translate to him finding some of his best form that saw him win 4 best and fairest at the Demons including a best and fairest in a premiership year, just to show how classy he can be at his peak. He averaged 72% of the Demons CBAs last season, and I expect him to move straight into that Giant starting midfield, which will only help free up Tom Green and Finn Callaghan. Obviously, as we just mentioned, though, Finn Callaghan will probably be a tag watch, depending on some teams. And as we saw from the CBA's percentages, Green and Callaghan were the clear top two midfielders, with Stephen Canelio being that third banana last season with 43% of CBAs on average. So I think those three plus Oliver probably make up the expected midfield mix this season at the Giants. Obviously, as we mentioned, Josh Kelly will be out with injury. And you did touch on it very briefly. He did suffer that hamstring strain on the 12th of January. So we'll have to wait and see how much this impacts his match fitness come round one, because as we know, when he does have a preseason riddled by injury, his performance across the season does take its toll and has a bit of an impact on his scoring. And it seems to take a while to get going. So probably not looking to target Oliver early on in the season until I see some signs of improvement on that average from last season. But there's no doubt at his best, he's a must-play selection in those Sunday Showdown fixtures and their primetime games. But it remains to be seen whether he can get back to that peak level at his best.
Yeah, that's probably what scares me the most, I reckon. I don't know if I'd have the guts to play him, having not seen much of him early on. I'd like to see how he goes, like outside of a practice match in the, in an opening round one. I'd like to see it first before I go into it. But I think he probably only adds to Callaghan just from my opinion too, like with Clayton Oliver's ability and Tom Green's ability to win their footy at the source and then be able to get it out to Callaghan. Like I actually think they could work quite well together. And I think Clary's addition to the midfield could really help Finn Callaghan. So let's hope that Clary does get back to his best. Because I think that's what we want as GS coaches, right? We want, the best fantasy players to be working at their best.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that brings us to the end of our GWS Giants preview and the end of our third preview show. However, before we end, Pitty, it is time for our favorite part of the show, our pack opening game. I'm going to quickly explain how the pack opening games work for our preseason shows. At the end of every preseason show, we'll open a 9-player rare all-star pack. And if any players from the 3 teams we previewed in that episode or the last episode, we've made a bit of a change there, we're including last episode as well, are pulled, they will go straight into the giveaway pool. So today, if any Magpies, Bombers, Dockers, Cats, Suns, or Giants players are pulled, they're going straight into that giveaway pool. To enter the giveaway and have a chance at winning player cards, simply just need to subscribe to the Fantasy Bros YouTube page, like the video, and comment who your MVP is for that particular preview show. This means you can have up to 6 entries in the giveaway by the end of our preseason team preview shows. All winners will be drawn in our first live round preview on the 4th of March before opening round commences. Pitty, I can see on screen there you've got our 9-player rare ready to rock and roll. Do you want to rip that pack, mate?
I do, mate. Absolutely. I want to rip it. I'm going to have to really think here, just as these players are pulled, what team they're from. 6 teams we're looking for here, so let's see how we go.
That's it. We've got to remember 6 teams.
So just note that. Oh, is that a diamond? That's a diamond, I think, there.
It is a diamond. A good start.
Oh, I'm feeling that's a Dacos.
Hopefully that goes
2 golds
straight into our giveaway pool.
Yeah, look. I don't think we've even talked about what you want, top, middle, bottom. But I'm just going to rip this top, mate. I'm going to start from this top right corner over here. We'll do a gold.
Yeah.
And we have Mr. Worldwide. It's a big piddo. So he's taking that number 1 ruck position. Toby Murray, gold Toby Murray from the Adelaide Crows. And here's our diamond. Zach Bench. That's a bit of a letdown. Bit unfortunate there. That could have been nice. Would have been nice if that was another kangaroo there. All right, we'll start with our middle row here. White from the Demons. Colson. Oh, this is not a great pack here. That's a good card. Gold Harry Mackay. That's a very good card, actually. Speaking about him a few episodes ago. Now our bottom row, we'll start over here with our platinum. So a platinum Jackson Mead from the Power. Geelong, a gold Moller. Let's not throw that one in a pack. I'm sure we can find something better. and a gold Reece Stanley. So the gold Stanley can go in. We might hold on to that Moller potentially.
Hey, that is grim viewing. How about we rip another pack? We'll open another one.
Yeah, I think we do, mate. Not a great one, unfortunately. See if Cal wants that platinum genie.
He does love his port players. All right, we've got another 9-player ready to go.
You're probably the one why I was opening them. You've got
mate,
you've
that
got
looks terrible. Let's hopefully see some better cards in this pack.
Yeah, I haven't had a lot of luck at all lately. I've been really struggling with my pack luck.
It's like an all gold pack. So we have Zach Guthrie straight into the giveaway pool.
There we go.
Tyler Sonsi, Dev Robertson, who I actually think will be a good pick for potentially some Sunday Showdown games this season.
Yeah, and who knows what his upside's like too.
Brad Close into the giveaway pool. Isaac Quaynor into the giveaway pool. Here we go. Now we're on a roll. Murphy from Fremantle. It's not Murphy Reed, though. Judd McVee, which is not a bad, but that can go into the giveaway pool.
Yep.
Anthony Day Wicks and Harry O'Keefe. So there's quite a few there. So we've got Anthony Day Wicks into the giveaway pool, Judd McVee, Zach Guthrie, Brad Close, and Isaac Quaynor into the giveaway pool. So that's a lot better pack after the dud first one that we received.
Yeah, apologies to all viewers there for opening that pack in front of you. New users who are still looking to sign up, when registering, use the promo code FBAR26, that's all in capital letters, for 3 9-player common packs. And a bit of a spoiler, we'll be dropping the first ever Aussie Rules textbook in the next couple of weeks. I did allude to that earlier. This textbook will be your preseason guide to everything Game Day Squad Aussie Rules, so make sure you keep an eye on all socials for the release date. Our team preview shows will drop every Monday and Thursday on the FantasyBros YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify pages. Now, don't forget to like and subscribe across all of our socials to keep up to date via @FantasyBros AU on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Apple Music, and Spotify. Haz, thank you very much for another great episode, mate. And our next team preview will be Hawthorn, Melbourne, and North Melbourne. I'm already looking forward to that one.
Yeah, it'll be a great chat, mate. Thanks very much for your first time hosting. Really appreciate it. And I'll see you next team preview.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode by the Fantasy Bros. If you want to show your support, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this show on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcast. Also, make sure you check us out on TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Just search @FantasyBros AU.